Lauded by many during the pandemic, heckled this morning on her way into the UK COVID inquiry.
What happened to your WhatsApps, Nicola Sturgeon?
Nicola Sturgeon is a polished performer, but the pressure was on.
Is it still your position today that you and the Scottish Government were open, transparent and accountable in your actions, not just in your words, at all times throughout the pandemic response in Scotland?
Yes, that is still my position. Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. I'll start with the update on the latest COVID-19 statistics.
Day after day, Nicola Sturgeon appeared at a podium to front up public briefings. But how upfront has she been about how decisions were being made behind the scenes? The former First Minister used a personal phone rather than a government device. This morning, she was pushed to confirm she has wiped her WhatsApp messages from the time.
I was very thorough, and not just in the pandemic, but in all my work in government, to ensure that things were appropriately recorded, but in line with the advice I'd always been given since my first day in government probably was not to retain conversations like that on a phone that could be lost or stolen and therefore not secure.
But did you delete them?
Yes.
Back in August 2021, when it was clear a public inquiry would expect records to be retained, Channel 4 News asked Nicola Sturgeon a question which has become crucial.
Can you guarantee to the bereaved families that you will disclose emails, WhatsApps, private emails, if you've been using them, whatever, that nothing will be off limits in this inquiry?
I think if you understand statutory public inquiries, you would know that even if I wasn't prepared to give that assurance, which for the avoidance of doubt I am, then I wouldn't have the ability. This will be a judge-led statutory public inquiry.
He asked specific questions about informal means of communication, including WhatsApps, but you knew by that stage that your WhatsApps had been destroyed.
But I also knew that anything of any relevance or substance from any of that material would be properly recorded in the Scottish Government system and indeed would have been communicated in all likelihood by me through the daily media briefings that I gave.
He asked whether the emails, WhatsApps, private emails, whatever, would be disclosed, and you gave an assurance that they would be.
You're trying to answer the substance of the question, and when you look back at the literal terms of the answer, it can be put to you in that way. So I accept that, and I apologise if that answer was not as clear.
Throughout the pandemic, contrasts were drawn between Boris Johnson and Nicola Sturgeon. She believes he was the wrong person to be Prime Minister during a pandemic.
I thought Boris Johnson was the wrong person to be Prime Minister. Full stop.
So was she the right First Minister for the job?
There's a large part of me wishes that I hadn't been, but I was, and I wanted to be the best First Minister I could be during that period. It's for others to judge the extent to which I succeeded.
There's no denying the heavy burden COVID placed on political leaders, but some bereaved families feel a bond of trust has been broken. Peter McMahon lost his wife, Debbie.
Through the whole pandemic, I thought, yeah, I did trust her, even after Debbie passed away, but now I'm not so sure.
I think that trust overall has been damaged and broken, but the transparency that the former First Minister talks about in her leadership of government and of Scottish Government, I'm not seeing that at all.
The story of COVID in Scotland is the story of the hubris of Nicola Sturgeon, is it not?
No, I do not believe that to be the case, and I am deeply sorry to each and every bereaved person and each and every person who suffered in other ways. I did my best, my government did our best, and people will judge that.
We're simply not used to seeing this sort of emotion from Nicola Sturgeon. She denied seeking political opportunity during the pandemic or taking decisions that might increase support for independence, and said she would always carry with her regret about any decisions she did get wrong. All this from a former First Minister who until last year seemed almost untouchable. Nicola Sturgeon, how you lost the trust of bereaved families. Why did you tell them nothing would be off limits when your WhatsApp messages had been deleted? Even after hours of evidence, many families were left feeling they still don't have the full picture. Well, at this This was a striking evidence session today. You know, we're used to seeing Nicola Sturgeon as a politician on the front foot, not somebody with a faltering voice. Now, of course, the emotion is going to grab headlines. Some of the families I spoke to today thought it was spin. They thought these were crocodile tears. Others, while still having many questions, did believe that emotion from a leader who says her biggest regret was not locking down sooner. But I think the most brutal exchanges really came around the central accusation that while appearing open, appearing transparent, she was hiding information from the public. Now, Baroness Hallett says at the end of today's session she doesn't expect to hear from the former First Minister again. The inquiry, though, continues.
Catherine, thanks very much. Well, you can hear more about Nicola Sturgeon's WhatsApp revelations by visiting our YouTube channel. Here, Kieran takes you through just how his question to Scotland's former First Minister back in 2021 led to her apology at the COVID inquiry today. Well, earlier I spoke to the former leader of the Scottish National Party in Westminster, Ian Blackford. I started by asking him whether Nicola Sturgeon was wrong to say that all government messages would be available to the inquiry.
At the end of the day, Nicola obviously made an honest mistake. She's apologised for that statement. Cathy, what I think is important is that the COVID inquiry is able to get to the root of everything that happened, that we do show that politicians, all politicians, the First Minister included, are transparent in what they say. What I can say to you, knowing the First Minister as I did, that everything was properly recorded. If you're talking about cabinet meetings, if you're talking about the decisions that were made, this was a woman when she was in office that was solely focused on doing her best for all in society, of getting people through the COVID pandemic. She didn't routinely use social media as a platform, and I know that she always sought to make sure that she did her best for everyone.
Right,
and I think she's demonstrated today that she's sought to be transparent and open with people.
Well, she's admitted deleting WhatsApps. The Gold Command high-level meetings were not minuted. Was she wrong to delete those messages, do you think?
Well, one of the things that the First Minister made sure was that if there was anything that was being discussed in social media messaging was then important for the conduct of government business, then that would have been routinely recorded, and that's the commitment that she gave, and we know that took place. That's for the
inquiry to judge what was important. Was she wrong to delete those messages or not retain them, as she puts it?
One of the things that the Scottish Government is now doing is conducting an inquiry to the use of social media messaging. And I think there's a big issue for all of us in terms of how those in public office should be behaving.
Ian, you're dodging the question. Was she wrong to delete those messages?
One of the things, look, as parliamentarians, let me say to you that we are told to routinely delete our social media messages. That's the advice that we get for security reasons.
Right, so she was just obeying orders, was she?
Well, look, at the end of the day, I think what we should be looking at is the First Minister seeking to evade scrutiny? Is she seeking to evade providing information through the COVID inquiry? Is she seeking to make sure that she gives proper answers to people? That's exactly what she has done today in front of the committee.
Was she wrong to delete the messages or not? Yes or no?
No, because at the end of the day, she has made sure that all the appropriate information has been handed over.
Messages were deleted. The Gold Command, the high-level meetings were not minuted. It looks very much that this government, you've had officials talking about, finding out where the clear chat button is and all of that. It looks very much that this was a government intent on secrecy, and there were really obvious reasons why, potentially. There was Alex Salmond's trial to factor in. There was the police investigation into the SNP finances. Nicola Sturgeon had every reason to want secrecy, didn't she?
No, that's not the case. And, when you talk about the police inquiry, that is something that happened way after the COVID pandemic. At the end of the day, I know that with the former First Minister, with Nicola Sturgeon, she always sought to do things in the correct manner.
She got very emotional repeatedly today in the inquiry. Were you surprised how overwhelmed she said she was during the pandemic? Was this a leader who wasn't really cut out for a national emergency?
No, not at all. And I have to say that I'm glad that she was there to lead us at that time. And let's contrast that with the leadership that we had from the UK government with Boris Johnson. And I think what you saw today with that emotion that Nicola showed is the personality of the woman, someone that cares about people, someone that's empathetic, but someone that, above all else, through that period, sought to take her responsibilities and to do her job.
The bereaved families say it was crocodile tears.
I'm sorry that they say that, and I think one of the things that we always have to keep in mind that there are hundreds of thousands of people up and down these islands that paid the price of losing their loved ones, and they should be first and foremost in our minds, and it's why the inquiry should take place. And I hope that those that have lost loved ones, those that had to make sacrifices, those that can't be at funerals will have the opportunity to get all the evidence heard that needs to be heard, and of course for the right conclusions to be drawn.
Ian Blackford, thanks very much.
Thank you.
Well, we're now joined by the leader of the Scottish Conservatives, Douglas Ross. Mr Ross, the pandemic was, I think you'll acknowledge, an unprecedented situation. Do you sympathise with the weight of responsibility and the toll that took on Nicola Sturgeon?
Well, I know leaders across the United Kingdom and across the world felt that toll. These were extremely difficult decisions that were having to be made on a daily basis. But what we've seen here in Scotland today in this evidence and before is the attempts that Nicola Sturgeon and senior members of her government went to delete crucial evidence that they knew would be required by the inquiry. And we now know that they were looking at political gain from the pandemic. There was a revelation today. Well,
Let me just pick you up on the messages, because your leader at the time, Boris Johnson, deleted 5,000 WhatsApp messages, or at least thousands of messages went missing. And I suppose you could say about Nicola Sturgeon, she didn't let off steam by hosting bacchanalian parties, as Boris Johnson did.
Nicola Sturgeon promised, in fact, to Channel 4 News when she was asked in one of her daily COVID briefings if she would hand over all relevant material, WhatsApps, party emails, government emails, and she was categorical. She said yes. That was a lie to the press, it was a lie to the public, and it has hampered the efforts of the COVID inquiry here in Scotland, the UK COVID inquiry that's meeting in Scotland, because there are messages that we just don't know what were contained within them, because they have been destroyed.
Because Boris Johnson didn't promise to make the messages available, he's off the hook, is he?
Well, no, I'm looking at the situation we've got here with the former First Minister of Scotland, who promised to be upfront and honest, who made a commitment to
I'm drawing the
bereaved
parallel
families
with your leader
the
at the
necessary
time, Boris Johnson, and he wasn't upfront and honest, and he was busy having parties with red wine being spilt up the wall.
And I never defended that once, and it was wrong, and Boris Johnson is no longer Prime Minister, no longer in elected office. Nicola Sturgeon remains a member of the Scottish Parliament, and she has to answer as to why she promised to be truthful, to give all that information to the inquiry. At the same time, she knew she had already deleted her messages and continued to delete messages after the Do Not Destroy order was issued by both the UK and the Scottish COVID inquiries.
Wasn't she a better pandemic leader than Boris Johnson?
Well, as I was saying earlier, we now know that the Scottish Government were looking at political gain during the pandemic. They said some of the decisions were taken for purely political reasons. They wanted to create a rammy with the UK Government. And today, this was appalling what we heard today, that the Scottish Government were considering the implications of independence and getting into the EU when they were looking at a travel ban from Spain. They actually considered what Spain's reaction to that would be in terms of their own obsession with separation and taking Scotland out of the United Kingdom.
And apologies, there was some bad language in the background, not from you. Apologies to anyone who was offended. I notice you're shedding a tear yourself, I'm assuming from the cold rather than from the emotion of this interview, but Nicola Sturgeon was pretty tearful. It's fine, don't worry at all, we've made you stand in the cold. But Nicola Sturgeon was herself tearful in this evidence today. Do you have sort of human sympathy for her, for the fact that she says she did her utmost and she admits at times it wasn't good enough?
Well, Nicola Sturgeon is a very accomplished performer in Parliament, in the media, and we saw at the COVID inquiry today her efforts to avoid answering some of the questions. But in terms of her tears at the inquiry today, I think I take on board very seriously what the families of the COVID bereaved think, that there were crocodile tears. It's not for me to judge if that's right or not, but I think we should listen to and take great... No, well, I'm just saying what you put to Ian Blackford, that it's the families of the COVID bereaved who we are seeking to get the answers for. They were calling that crocodile tears. I think their views are far more important than the opinions of partisan politicians.
Douglas Ross, thanks very much for joining us.